Okay, let's just jump right into this. We are diving into a truly terrifying explainer today, and we're going to completely dissect the chilling reality behind what is arguably Japan's most inescapable urban legend. Now, if you have ever felt a sudden, just totally inexplicable chill down your spine while you are completely alone in a public restroom, well, then you are already intimately familiar with the exact hunting grounds of our subject today. You know, Japan is renowned globally for its incredibly rich folklore. It's a culture that is beautifully fertile for monsters and ghosts and spirits. But while some of those mythological beings are there to offer moral lessons or maybe protect ancient forests, others exist for literally one single sadistic purpose: to exploit our absolute most vulnerable moments. So today we are completely dissecting the legend of Aka Manto, which translates to the Red Cloak. We are going to look really deeply into the history, the spatial psychology, and the absolute paralyzing horror of a spirit that traps its victims in an impossible, deadly game. Let's get into it.
So I want you to imagine the dead silence of a public restroom. It's quiet, maybe a little too quiet, and then suddenly that silence is shattered by a sinister whisper echoing from the shadows. Do you want red paper or blue paper? It is a question that literally forces you to choose your own demise. You see, the legend of Aka Manto isn't about some mindless, hulking monster that simply kicks down the stall door and attacks you. No, it is far more psychological than that. This spirit forces you to actively participate in your own horrific end. And the crazy thing is, the question is usually presented super calmly. Sometimes it's described as this surprisingly handsome, velvety or charming voice coming from behind a porcelain mask. But make absolutely no mistake, this is a meticulously designed trap. The true terror here comes from that sudden, stomach-dropping realization that the completely mundane reality of a boring restroom has just been hijacked by a supernatural predator. You aren't just a victim anymore, you are a player, and you are being forced into its game.
We are placing you right inside the nightmare right now, because this spirit specifically targets you in the absolute most physically and socially vulnerable space imaginable. According to the lore, Aka Manto doesn't just appear anywhere. He has a very specific preference for dimly lit school and public restrooms, and almost always, he lurks in the very last stall, often in the women's restroom actually. Just imagine it for a second. You finish your business, those awful fluorescent lights are buzzing and humming above you, you reach over for the toilet paper, and suddenly your hand just hits bare cardboard. You realize the roll is completely empty. Now that's a moment of mild, everyday panic that pretty much all of us have experienced, right? But the genius of this legend is that it takes this entirely mundane vulnerability and turns it into pure, suffocating horror. Because in this scenario, that empty roll is not a janitorial accident. It is the bait.
Let's break down the exact steps of this deadly game, where Aka Manto, this masked spirit of the bathroom, traps his victims. The sequence is actually remarkably consistent across decades of Japanese oral tradition, and it operates like a totally flawless predatory mechanism. Step 1. The toilet paper mysteriously vanishes before you can even use it. You are literally, physically trapped on the toilet, unable to leave without profound embarrassment. Step 2. That disembodied, eerie voice echoes in the confined, tiled space, offering you those two distinct colors. And Step 3. The exact second you utter your response, your agonizing fate is entirely sealed. The trap is sprung. There is no physical struggle. There is no desperate chase down a long, dark hallway like in a slasher movie. The entire nightmare unfolds, begins, and brutally ends in a space barely larger than a phone booth.
And this brings us to the core of the horror. This brilliantly illustrates the horrific illusion of choice at the heart of the legend. Pick red, and you are flayed. Pick blue, and you are strangled. Aka Manto offers what psychologists actually call a double bind. If you utter the word red, the entity violently slashes and flays you. The legend says he lacerates your body with such absolute ferocity that your clothes become completely soaked in your own blood. He is effectively giving you the grotesque red cloak that he himself wears. But what if you panic, try to avoid a bloody slasher-style end, and you choose blue? Well, the spirit will mercilessly strangle you, crushing your windpipe until your face turns a deep, suffocated blue. And some of the darker, more visceral variations of the story even state that choosing blue results in all the blood being violently and entirely drained from your body. You are offered a choice, yes, but both roads lead to an incredibly gruesome end. It's a lose-lose situation of the highest order.
Now you might be thinking, well, I'll just pick a different color. If you think you can cheat the system by picking yellow, your fate is just as grim, ending headfirst in the dirty toilet bowl. Human nature naturally, desperately looks for a loophole when backed into a corner like this. When faced with a binary choice where both options mean an agonizing death, people inevitably think, I'll just break the rules. But Aka Manto is literally always one step ahead. In many tellings of this urban legend, a victim will confidently demand yellow paper, hoping to confuse or short-circuit the spirit. The result? The entity violently grabs the victim's head and shoves it deep into the toilet bowl, pinning them there and forcing them to drown in the foul water. It is a grotesque, incredibly humiliating punishment specifically tailored for those who think they can outsmart the game.
So the absolutely crucial point here is that trying to outsmart this supernatural trap only opens a one-way portal to hell itself. If yellow leads to drowning, what about green, or purple, or black? The lore is incredibly strict and entirely unforgiving here. If you ask for any other random color, the very floor beneath you simply vanishes. A gaping portal to the underworld rips open right there in the bathroom stall. And then, dozens of pale, white, decaying, ghostly hands emerge from the pitch-black darkness, grabbing your legs, your waist, your arms, and dragging you down into the abyss forever. The legend makes one thing crystal clear to anyone listening: you cannot outwit Aka Manto. The rules of his game are absolute, and trying to be clever will literally drag you straight to the underworld.
Section 1. Origins of the Red Cloak, Tracing the Nightmare. Let's move on and dig into where this all came from.
Now that your heart rate is definitely up, let's step back and dissect how this legend actually evolved over the decades. Because urban legends, they don't just appear out of nowhere overnight. They mutate and they grow, meticulously adapting to the deepest fears of whatever generation is currently telling them. Aka Manto is a fascinating case study in folklore evolution. Tracing it back, we see it evolve from a 1930s schoolyard rumor in Osaka into a modern-day phantom. According to folklorists, the word manto in the 1930s originally referred to a sleeveless kimono-style jacket. Back then, terrified students whispered about a creepy man hiding in the dark, basement shoe lockers of elementary schools. Then, by the 1940s, as the rumor spread from Osaka all the way to Tokyo, the manto became a literal red cloak, and the figure was described by panicked locals as an actual vampire attacking the community. But the most crucial shift happens later. By the 1980s, the legend modernized completely. It moved from the shadowy shoe lockers into the inescapable confines of the tiled restroom, and that horrific binary choice of the red and blue paper officially became the dark core of the myth we know and fear today.
What's genuinely interesting here is how the spirit's identity actually fractures into two distinct profiles depending on the region and the era you look at. In the classic Tokyo version, Aka Manto is a tall, unnervingly handsome man. He wears a flowing red cloak and hides his striking, mesmerizing face behind a mask, intentionally using his charming voice to lure unsuspecting victims into a false sense of security before springing the trap. He's very much a classic phantom. But in other regions, the myth takes on a deeply tragic, entirely different tone. Aka Manto is instead a female student who suffered horrific, relentless bullying in that very bathroom. Now, twisted into a vengeful spirit, she returns to the exact site of her ultimate humiliation to exact a bloody, sadistic revenge on absolutely anyone unlucky enough to cross her path in the dark. It's a totally different flavor of horror, but equally terrifying.
And regional variations keep the terror fresh in other ways too. Like up in the freezing northern island of Hokkaido, the legend shifts slightly again. As oral traditions spread across the country, they inevitably adapt to local flavors and anxieties, right? So in Hokkaido, you aren't asked about toilet paper. Instead, the voice echoing from the shadows asks, "Do you want a red cloak or a blue cloak?" The sadistic, morbid outcome, however, remains exactly the same. Say red, and the spirit violently rips the skin entirely from your back to create a literal red cloak of your own blood and tissue. Say blue, and you are mercilessly asphyxiated. The object in the question changes, sure, but that horrific, sadistic illusion of choice remains the undeniable focal point of the story.
Section 2. The Anatomy of a Nightmare. Why we fear the bathroom. Let's really dissect the psychology of this location.
So, why are there so many Japanese urban legends entirely centered around bathrooms? From the ghostly girl Hanako-san to the bone-chilling Aka Manto, the restroom is this recurring, deeply unsettling theater of horrors in Japanese folklore. It's definitely not just a coincidence, it is deeply rooted in spatial psychology. As folklorist Michael Dillon Foster notes, the bathroom is a space, a liminal space, where there is a connection between the normal world of everyday life and a totally different realm, as if it were a sewer.
This quote perfectly captures the psychological horror of liminal spaces. The public restroom is where we are most isolated, unguarded, and deeply vulnerable to the unknown. Foster points out that a bathroom is inherently transitional. It's a place where biological waste is disposed of, intimately connecting our clean, bright, everyday reality above ground to the dark, unseen, subterranean world of sewers below. When you enter a stall and lock the door, you are completely cut off from society. You are functionally unguarded. Aka Manto specifically exploits this universal human vulnerability. He strikes in the exact moment and location where our defenses are entirely down and we are isolated in this weird liminal zone.
But I know what you're thinking. Is there a way out? Your only real survival tactic is to refuse the game entirely, though even that is a massive gamble. The generally accepted way to survive Aka Manto is to politely but very firmly decline his offer. If you say, "I do not need any paper," the spirit reportedly becomes confused, his strict rules are totally bypassed, and he simply vanishes into the ether. However, come on, it's never really that easy in the world of urban legends. If you panic, as literally most of us would, and try to simply sprint out the door without answering, many terrifying accounts say Aka Manto will instantly teleport to block the exit. Other chilling variations claim that the moment his voice speaks, the bathroom actually shifts into a parallel dimension. The doors lock, the windows vanish, and no matter what you say or do, you are trapped in his realm forever.
Section 3. Aka Manto in pop culture. Let's look at how this spread beyond just campfire stories. Today, the red cloak has transcended urban legend to become a massive global horror icon. A story this perfectly, methodically terrifying couldn't possibly stay confined to the schoolyards of Japan forever. Over the last 2 decades, the myth of Aka Manto has bled heavily into modern media. Creators around the world have recognized the sheer, unadulterated psychological dread of that binary choice. For example, did you know the massive global hit series Squid Game heavily references this legend? The director confirmed that the mysterious recruiter offering the choice between the red and blue paper tiles in the subway is a direct, deliberate nod to Aka Manto. That blows my mind. You can also see his sinister influence all over gaming, the killer mantle enemy in Castlevania, the ghostly hand begging for paper in the toilets of the Zelda games, and brilliant indie horror hits like World of Horror. There's even a dedicated Aka Manto game by Chillis Art, where you have to survive a faceless, knife-wielding maniac in a claustrophobic, terrifying school setting. The nightmare has truly gone international. Ultimately, this entire terrifying legend boils down to just 2 impossible choices. It is the brilliant, devastating simplicity of the number 2 that makes Aka Manto so incredibly enduring. Think about it. Human beings are fundamentally wired to want choices. We deeply believe that having an option gives us control over our own destiny. But this legend completely weaponizes our desire for control. It gives you an A or a B, tricking your brain into thinking there's a right answer, a safe path, when in reality, both paths are meticulously designed to completely destroy you. It is an absolute masterclass in psychological horror, completely stripping away the victim's agency while making them feel like they made the fatal decision themselves.
So I want to leave you with this final, lingering thought. The next time you find yourself entirely alone in a dim stall, maybe the fluorescent lights are humming, you reach for the roll, and you find it empty. What color will you choose? The legend of Aka Manto serves as a dark, creeping reminder of the severe dangers of vulnerability and the terrifying realization that sometimes the simple choices we face are absolutely anything but safe. Think about that the next time you hear a strange, inexplicable sound echoing off the cold tiles of a dimly lit bathroom. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the darkest shadows of Japanese folklore. Stay safe out there, stay vigilant, and whatever you do, never, ever answer the voice in the stall.